Hey everyone, welcome back to Empowered and Out, the podcast where we have honest conversations about work, identity, leadership, and what it really takes to build a career without abandoning yourself in the process. I'm your host, Coach Jon, and today's conversation is one I think a whole lot of people are going to feel in their bones. And then, of course, in this season, we are talking about healing and resilience, what it really takes to recover from workplace trauma, protecting your mental health, rebuilding your confidence, and coming back to yourself without leaving parts of yourself behind. And this year, we're doing things differently. We're elevating, we're expanding, we're prospering together. Through real conversations and coaching-centered insights, my goal is to help you reconnect with your confidence, trust yourself more, and start making career choices that support not just your success, but your well-being too. So take a deep breath, settle in, and let's get into today's conversation. Today, I'm joined by Greg Mazzeo, a leadership psychologist, HR practitioner, consultant, and someone who brings a deeply human-centered lens to performance, workplace culture, and what happens when identity gets challenged on the job. With roots in food service leadership and a passion for driving performance through people-first practices, Greg brings both research and real-lived experience to this conversation, especially as an LGBT professional navigating systems that don't always make space for authenticity, nuance, or belonging. In this episode, we're digging into inclusive language, identity threats, performance conversations, leadership gaps, and the tension between business outcomes and actual human well-being. We're also getting real about how hard it can be when intention and impact don't line up, and what better leadership can actually look like when empathy and accountability are both on the table. So, Greg, welcome to Empowered and Out.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So before we jump in, let's start with an energy check-in. I ask all my guests this. So on a scale from 1 to 10, how is your energy today? And what's contributing to that number?
Oh, I love that. So probably 8.5 out of 10. 8.5 out of 10. I had a really great time the last couple of days, just socializing, giving my brain a rest, and just being around community. And so I really was
Nice.
able to put that first the last couple of days. And so, yeah, that was, and then sleep wise wasn't great the last couple of days. So that's where that 1.5% missing is happening.
Well, that's good, especially as we're recording on a Monday. A
Yeah.
lot of people may not start that high up on a Monday, but it's good that you kind of had a good, kind of a refresh, a kind of a relax weekend to kind of bring you into this. So awesome. That is really great. I mean, for me, I would say I'm at a 9. I'm not quite at a 10. I think it's almost, sometimes I kind of feel it's almost impossible to be a 10. It's almost a little fake, but I'm excited for the week. I'm excited for our conversation, and it's going to be great. And I'm excited for how the conversation is going to go. And I know the listeners are going to really enjoy it. All right. So before we dive into deeper workplace stuff, I'd love to start with your journey, Greg. What pulled you toward leadership psychology, HR, and human-centered performance work in the first place?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a good starter because it's interesting. I spent so much time in the restaurant industry, and even before that, it was like performance was always a topic of conversation. It's school related, you're performing sports, like whatever it is, we're always performing. And so I oftentimes found myself like in an internal state of like questioning, am I performing at my best? And what does that even look like? And is it like a healthy format of performance? And so the more I assessed that and questioned that, the more curious I became. And so I spent 16 years in the restaurant industry, high stress, lots of teams, and like was able to really get a focus on developing people, leaders in those really time sensitive, stressful environments, and also satisfying customers, clients, things like that. So I kept thinking like, okay, there's more to like they're a person and their performance. There's usually, it's not linear. It's not
Mm-hmm.
this one-way street. There's so much more to unpack in a performance story. So I kept asking myself, like, there's something to this that is more than what I am aware of now. And so the more I became engulfed in assessing performance and trying to get to root causes on why people myself weren't performing well or missing the mark, I was like, there's something human here. We're people trying to do something. So I ended up really focusing on the people aspect, and which brought me to understand psychology and saying, okay, if I'm really going to assess performance in a humanistic way, I should probably start learning a bit of psychology. And so that led me to the psychology piece around leadership. And ultimately, that's kind of where I fell in wanting to focus on human resources, the human aspect of work. And so it all just kind of made sense. So I went from food to people, and I love both, which is why I'm in the kitchen today. So, and that's kind of where it took off. And then just really consulting allows me to have a broader impact, whether it's having a workshop, a conversation with someone, a coaching conversation, to really be able to just like be an octopus and just spread all the way I can to drive home. I'll focus on human beings in the workplace and that tension between performance and what really happens. So that's where I am today.
Awesome. So, what made you want to build your own LLC on top of the work you're already doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my LLC Nourishment Consulting, it's just it's in its infant stage, it's in its baby. It's really exciting because I said, something is missing and I want to go work independently in this kind of aspect because it allows me a little bit more efficiency and assessing what I think needs to be done to support whatever organization group I'm helping. And so it allows me to really have a little bit of free range. There's not as much politics because I'm working with myself, unless I'm being political with myself, which I do have a lot of conversations and questions of that inner dialogue. So that's the piece that really there's an art form to it, I think, and it allows me to be a little bit more adventurous and pulling the tools, the resources, the knowledge, and also pulling support from my own network of consultants as well that I've gained along the way. So there's a little bit of freedom in there, but there's a lot of responsibility too.
For sure, yeah. So, talking about driving performance through human centered practices, which I think is a very important reframe right now. What does that actually mean in real life and not just in theory?
Yeah, that's a great question, especially like to your point. We're going through so much change right now, especially with AI, where there's artificial intelligence meets human intelligence meets the workplace meets uncertainty. So what is going on? One of the things I mentioned is being able to collaborate and build the workplace together. And so oftentimes we're seeing competition. Who can achieve the goal the fastest? Who can hit the metric the best? We end up hiding information. We don't express baby learnings, or we also pin each other against each other through competition. And there's usually othering. I'm the winner, you're the loser. Not a great human way that can activate threat mode. That's really
Yeah.
counterproductive. And I get sometimes competition is helpful in most cases. So a human centered way would be building expectations together in a co collaborative way. Who are the stakeholders being directly impacted by maybe AI, and saying, okay, how is their jobs going to change? And how do we bring them into the conversation so they're involved in that process of setting workplace expectations versus a top down approach saying, here's what the expectations are. You need to do it. And so it's pulling people in through collaboration is one of the techniques I use, as well as there's bottom up and top down and all sorts of directionality in terms of feedback. Feedback is critical, and integrating psychological safety in the environments through our behaviors is something people can do, which means that we're being vulnerable, which we don't like to do to start. So, and that usually requires the head person with the title to lead in vulnerability, which means saying, I don't know the answer. It could mean that they're admitting a mistake. It could mean they're telling a personal story of what's meaningful to them. And role modeling that signals to the other groups that it's okay to acknowledge that. And you're not going to be on the chopping block for a mistake that could be really helpful for people to learn from. So using it as a learning technique and a learning behavior is really critical these days, especially when we're talking about performance, when we have a new program in place and we're expecting people to use it.
Mhm.
Workday, UKG, all the different systems, that requires human behavior to change. And so if we're not enabling folks to try it and learn from it, make mistakes, and they're feeling like maybe their character, their confidence, their status is going to be jeopardized in it, then we end up really sacrificing the ability to be effective. So those are a couple of human centered. Again, I just threw out some like neuro pieces and some psych pieces of safety and identity. So those are the ways of working that really help drive performance in a human centered way.
I like that. Well, I like that you brought up like collaboration. Collaboration is huge. I think it's one of the biggest, you know, biggest ways to bring things together to get to the right, to potentially get to the right, to where you want to get to, but getting answers from other people that may not always give the input to begin with. And I find it's really important because sometimes that one quiet, shy person who may not have really ever talk might pipe in during that collaboration. Then that might be where you actually go. You might go towards what they brought up because they had been thinking a lot about it and no one had really asked them to join in on a conversation like that. So I like that.
Yeah, that's a great
So
point too. If it, can I
yeah,
expand a little bit on that?
of course. Yeah.
Because I think you're tapping into like equity and personality differences and participation levels. And so when we facilitate or when we lead discussions, we're from a young age really programmed in a way to raise our hand and speak up, and we get graded for participation. But sometimes not
Hmm.
everyone feels safe to participate. It might be because the loudest people are in the room taking up all the space to talk. And so, but then we miss that voice that really could be the shifting voice. And so being able to be aware of that as leaders and say, okay, I haven't heard from this person, just being able to say, hey, person, we'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, can we move on? We want to make sure you're included in the discussion. So just calling that out and being highly aware of what's happening is critical.
So, I agree, 100%. So what do you what do you think most organizations still get wrong though about performance?
That it's, and I don't know all organizations, but
I
the
mean, yeah.
patterns and that would be amazing if I did. I'd be booked and busy for like decades to come. But uh, the patterns that I see the most in terms of getting wrong about performance is blaming one singular thing. And so and this goes back to human-centered performance. Instead of evaluating a person's missing the mark, missing the goal, and asking them like, okay, like why did this happen? The bigger question is what barriers were in place, what in the entire system or process didn't work out, what was challenging for achieving this outcome that we wanted. So going from an evaluative standpoint to a more reflective and holistic way of looking at a performance miss, that's an important element that I think we miss. We just are moving so quickly that we are interested to blame a person or blame one thing, and then we don't account for the entire pieces. It's like a puzzle. It's not going to look right. It's not going to be the fulfilling outcome you want without assessing all of the puzzle pieces that work together, that connect, and it's a system. They all are interdependent. So chances are there's a lot of blame to share, and being able to be safe about that and say, we're all to blame. And we're going to do this the next time because we're going to have the honest conversation now and assess it holistically. That's a really big miss that happens a lot in organizations. So, and those are defenses that come up. Those are human defenses.
Mhm.
The blame game, over intellectualizing, excusing the missed goal for this person, but when the other person tries to use the same defense, they are held accountable. So those are the pieces that really being able to notice the defense mechanisms from folks, but also assessing the whole system and a process versus evaluating one piece of it.
So where do you think metrics help and where do they start to hurt?
And I love data. I love metrics, but it's like a double-edged sword. I'm like, this is so useful,
Mhm.
but there's more to the story. Uh, and that's the key. They are great. But if you take them for what they are and they're maybe surface level and not understanding what's beneath them, then we run into a cycle of probably not effective change strategies or not performance that improves, or maybe you get like a half a percentage, nothing more impactful. So one of the things that needs to happen is you want to get multiple sources of metrics coming at you at once. So it's in three directions. And if they're all telling you the same thing, then that's critical. But maybe it's the metrics are only one area of topic. Maybe it's engagement and it talks about satisfied. All right, everyone's satisfied in this realm, but like performance is still not up to par. Maybe they're just satisfied with the status quo and that's not really performing well. So people can be happy and still underperform. So
Yeah.
so having more qualitative conversations, creating dialogic moments for folks. So having the ability to sit down with folks and have an open conversation, listening sessions, things like that, but being trained to do that in a way where it becomes discussion prompts over talking points. So if we're going in expecting to hear something from someone and you already are thinking as a leader, you know the answer, you're showing up not in the most productive way. So being very genuine and curious to understand what those metrics are saying. And then
Huh.
going back to the folks and saying, we need a little bit more information from you. Let's have a conversation. And that's where that
Okay.
including employee voice comes from. So really second guess the metrics. Be weary about
I like that. I really do. I think that's an interesting way to look at it overall because, yeah, you have to kind of see the overall picture and see really what can be potentially causing an issue that it may not lead, well, take a step back for that. It may lead to a thought of, oh, we need a PIP in place. But if you look at the overall picture, well, maybe not, because this is actually what was causing this. And this is where we should probably work on prior to even going down that path. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, looking at the whole, overall bigger picture, I think it's a good idea. So
And we love an
so
action plan. So action plans are
exactly.
similar,
Yeah.
right? So I was like, slow down on the action plan. We're not ready to take action. Because if you take action on the misdiagnosis or the misinterpretation of data, you've set it up to fail or get
Yeah,
partial results. So it's really critical. Take that time to really dive into that data or metric and say, is it working? And if you've got the same metrics, half a percentage one year, quarter percentage the next year, chances are we need to do a little further deep dive before we act in an action-oriented way.
for sure. So one of the topics, well, I would say one of the themes that you had given to me when you had reached out to initially jump on and be interviewed for my podcast was wanting to explore inclusive language and identity threats. So, for listeners who may be new to that idea, how would you explain what an identity threat experience can feel like in the workplace?
Mm. Yes, and listeners, get ready because this is a juicy topic, and it's people like poke their heads up. They're like, "What do you mean by that?" So, I'll start off with inclusive language because that's also identity threat. Inclusive language is basically a language that is very individualized, affirming, pulls people in with safety and being acknowledged with who you are. And so, if it's not used correctly, it can almost be an identity threat. Maybe it's a word people use misgendering someone. It could be a joke. It could be not seeing something on a company form that says if I'm married to a male and there's an automatic assumption that they give me a form that what's your wife's name or a gender specific when maybe it's a gender neutral term that's needed. So that is nuanced language and it's very nuanced because everyone's experience with it is different. What I might find affirming or acceptable is different to the next person. So there's no card I can give someone and say, here's all the words not to use. But identity threat, that could be that violates or triggers who you are as a person. So it puts you in a stress state. So that comes from the brain going into threat mode and your nervous system being activated. And then you're acting in more an emotional state versus a balanced logical and emotional state. For me, an identity trigger could be religion. So it could be something of religious history that makes me feel like, okay, I remember being in church and it was demonized that this part of who I was. So I have to remember that piece is part of my history and it could trigger a response or uncomfortableness. So something that really feels almost triggering in a way where maybe your heart rate's going, you're speaking faster, it's uncomfortable to talk about jokes that use homosexuality in it, triggering for me. Identity threat, where it feels like an attack. Things like that. So they're very nuanced, and usually we don't talk about them unless we're feeling like community and safety and shared experience. And so I ended up, and I know when we chatted, I really focused on inclusive language and pride flags and Black Lives Matter signs because those areas had a lot of people speaking about them, asking questions, had fear attached to saying the wrong thing,
Hmm.
doing or taking a flag down, which we saw a lot of. And that even could be a threatening motive, a move of, all right, like it was up for 5 years, now it's down and we're not putting it back up. What's the message in there? So those are the pieces that I really focused on and that cause maybe a response, an internal nervous system response from a threat response point of view in neuroscience that really usually goes undisclosed, but shows up in performance.
Interesting. So, how can something as seemingly small as wording or symbolism create a much bigger impact for employees?
Yeah. And so because they show up so often, it's everywhere. We all use language. I mean, and I do a TED talk about that as well, a TEDx talk. Language is everywhere. We're doing it right
Mm.
now. We're using it right now. And so it is everywhere, which means that if someone is experiencing it inclusively, they're getting pulled into that environment. Think about movies and shows when we feel connected to a character, we see ourselves in them. That's inclusivity at its best, pulling you in and feeling empathy and relatedness to them and connection, things that are really good for us, that human centered approach. And we want that in the workplace. So if your first day on the job is you're not seeing forms that kind of integrate who you are as a person and leave you out. If you're walking the halls and you see photos, but you don't see your race or sexual orientation represented in the marketing material, if you're hearing conversations and maybe they are inclusive to who you are, they're like talking about their boyfriend and they're out about it and acknowledging that, that's a safety signal. Maybe it's, but on the opposite, if someone's having a conversation about how they think is wrong, then that could be a threat. All of these things build up into microaggressions, into social signals that cause our identity to be in question. Or am I going to be judged? Or how am I going to look if they find this out? Even something simple as a photo of like someone and their partner on their desk. And so seeing that signals safety, relatedness. This person is visibly acknowledging their same sex relationship, things like that. So having those moments thread your entire day, it either can really empower you to be authentic and be able to go full throttle ahead, not worrying and carrying that stressor with you
Hmm.
throughout your day, or it could be kind of like a bumpy road and almost, and I did an activity once where I held a piece of paper and every time there was like a kind of threat or identity, you just kind of tear a piece of it. And then what do you have at the end of the day? Not much.
Yeah.
So that's kind of being able to say, okay, this is where the impact is. And so if you're kind of being able, if you're really moving through your day and you're still whole, that's a good sign. Maybe you have a little bit of a chip here because at the end of the day, no one's perfect. And
Right.
so we have to move past the expectation of perfection and go with learning. I'm not perfect with my language. I studied it. The biggest thing I learned was like, I'm not perfect with my language at all. I have a lot of work to do. And that's the beauty in it. Because what I say to someone might not be the best, and I have to learn from it and continuously grow with it. And I know it affects performance. And so, because if you're pulled into an organization, you feel like you're a part of that organization, that belonging, that influences your ability to be committed and perform.
Nice. Okay. So let's go back to impact. So, what do leaders often miss when they focus on intent but ignore the impact?
And this is like my favorite. Like, this is icing on the cake for me. And I use food analogies all the time from my background as I'm in the kitchen. Icing on the cake, impact and intention. So here's something that I loved. I love when I hear this from organizations is we focus on assume positive intention. Intentions are, let's get those out in the open. Yes, that is important. But when we focus on intention, we focus on what's in our head. When we not focus on impact or leave that out of the equation, or even just gloss over it because it gets very uncomfortable, we avoid what we do to someone's nervous system, to their experience. So we say, okay, I'm going to focus on what I did and excuse anything that I did that might impact you. So my intention was X. And so I'm going to just excuse like that little piece of self, but I'm not going to focus on what I did to impact the other person. And so
Mm.
an example I use is when I was a line cook, I had just gotten back from college. I was in Rhode Island for undergrad and very LGBT friendly, very exciting time. And I really got to learn myself and be in a space of affirming spaces and inclusivity. And so I came back and was picked up my job. I was serving at that point, and someone in the kitchen asked me, "Hey, like, how's school going?" And we're like, and I say in the kitchen, meaning we're in the back putting orders in. So another
Yeah, yeah,
server
yeah.
asked me, like, "Hey, like, how's school going? Is there a lot of LGBT stuff up there?" I was like, "Yeah, it's great." Blah 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 blah. I share. I'm going to clubs all the time, like thriving. And so we're talking from a question being asked, a line cook, and I started in the back house. I was a line cook when I was 16. Someone I didn't know basically screamed at me, cut that out. No one wants to hear that. So I'm answering a question I was asked to me, just doing my work, having a social moment. And I get yelled at. There was some cussing in the way, shut down completely. How am I supposed to perform at my job, for one, after just being yelled at by answering a question from a coworker? So long story short, I had a bunch of people kind of support me. They took my tables. They said, "Greg, do what you need to do." But my manager came in at one point and said, "I expected more from you." And I was like, and what had happened was he expressed, "You're a great person. You're a strong performer. I expected you to really just be able to rise up to that and be able to move through it." Intention was, "You're a great performer. You're better than this. You can do it." The impact was you didn't care about my safety. I already went through decades of this kind of stuff, and I was fearful that they was going to turn into violence because that's the pattern, right? And so the impact was, oh my gosh, I don't trust you anymore. I like really just, you don't really understand my needs as a worker, because if I don't feel safe in the workplace, I can't perform at my best.
Mhm.
And that stayed with me decades later. And so that's a story of intent and impact. You want to focus on the impact. Okay, how can I better help you in this situation, instead of making a judgment of, you could just move through this.
Yeah, wow. All right.
Yeah.
So, something you had also mentioned was the crosswinds of impact and intention, especially during performance conversations. What happens when a leader thinks that they're being helpful, but the employee experiences that moment as dismissive, harmful, or threatening?
Yeah, that's the juicy question. So there's usually a mishap that can happen when it's not an effective conversation. So identity is going to show up in those conversations, because we get to a point where we're like, okay, am I being evaluated? Are they going to see me as competent? Or am I going to be able to be rated, because we do ratings all the time, a 4 out of 5, or is this going to set me back? So there is a piece of who we are attached to evaluative processes. So we want to tap into more coaching versus evaluative. So coaching are more of the open-ended questions. I know you're a coach, so you're probably like, yes, please, more of this. So because then it's more nurturing and supportive versus evaluative, and you want to
Mhm.
feed forward instead of feed back. So
Right.
say, okay, this is what happened. How do we use it to move forward and be able to support that person feeling safe with who they are? And that could be exchanging information of resources that could better learn how not to let this happen again. And so that's where the crosswinds happen. All right, let me take the intention out of the way, because we already recognize we have a good relationship. The intentions are there. It's fine. All right. Now we need to deal with the impact and how to move forward. So I think coaching is going to be such a golden key to move forward versus evaluative practices when it comes to making sure that we're acknowledging impact, right, when it comes to performance. People generally are uncomfortable in performance conversations unless there's safety in place, and that's usually rare sometimes. So really being able to balance both of those, because oftentimes they're kind of crossed. So identifying, okay, this is a coaching conversation, or this is a performance like evaluation conversation, keeping them separate to be really clear, because we don't like ambiguity. We like clearness. So being very specific on why we're having the conversation around performance or coaching and going forward. So being very clear on those is helpful.
So, how do you think leaders can prepare for difficult conversations with more awareness and care?
Yeah. Question how you're showing up. If you're going in with, you think you know all of the information that happened, chances are you don't. And that's important to keep in front. Leaders need to, and myself included, and it's informal, formal leaders, we have to have a very deep understanding of who we are as people, as individuals first. So if you have done the work of understanding your past experiences and how they show up and how you see the current situations, that is something that you have to be very clear about. Because if I'm showing up to help someone, then I have to be very clear on showing up in a way that is curious and not controlling, that is not judgment based, but it's more inquiry based. So being able to show up in that way, and maybe it's the leaders writing all their judgments out on a piece of paper and throwing them away, saying, this is what I think happened. This is what I believe needs to take place. This is my solution that I want to present. Get rid of all of it. Get rid of it all and show up almost empty, ready to be a sponge of what they have to share. And so asking open-ended questions is really critical in that way. So that's how leaders really, that's the first step. If you're showing up assuming, and that's hard to turn off. Neurologically, our brains are wired to make judgments. We assess
Yeah.
every situation. We pick up all sorts of information. We do it without even realizing it. So it's a very hard skill to not judge.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. All right. So then on the flip side, so how can employees protect themselves and advocate for themselves in these moments as well?
We need that so bad right now, because it's places like this are helpful. Joining a community, maybe off work, that just, I think people are really craving relatability and safety. And so and shared experiences. So finding that uh, in maybe non-work, when it comes to work itself, being able to take care of your well-being. So sleep is critical.
Yes.
Breathing is helpful as well. Breathing through your stomach, not your chest. So those are pieces, but also keep a journal. Keep a journal of your experiences. It's helpful to get it from here, from your inside, and put it somewhere externally. You can do what you want with it, throw it out, make a paper airplane, stick it on your wall. I have like a whiteboard on my wall that I just write things down as it comes to me. So getting it from your internal state to your external state is really helpful. And so one of the things that also is helpful is when it comes to language itself, because maybe it's your keep experiencing language that is not as inclusive as you would want, or even indicating just role modeling language. So if you do notice you have one person in your corner who's helping you or supporting you feel comfortable with, have them mimic the language that you use, because that's usually the language we want to be used with us. And that could be, I was speaking with someone who ended up watching my TEDx, and they said it was almost like a lifeline. Like you're kind of that,
Mm.
you've like, at the end of the day, you're in spaces that maybe weren't designed for you. And that seems to be kind of unraveling these days, where pride flags are taken down, other symbols or communicative techniques. And so at the end of the day, language is almost like a lifeline to say, you're here, I see you. And so having that point of contact is really helpful. So don't hold it in, get it out.
I like that. And I like, yeah, I mean, there's a reason, just kind of, you mentioned it, like having this space, bringing on people, being able to listen for the listeners out there. I mean, I don't even know how many episodes I've recorded with interviews, but I know that there are plenty of people that I have brought on from literally all over the world, not just here in the United States, that have some very interesting perspectives. And especially coming from a leadership perspective, for those who are leading organizations, for those who are happen to be in like that C-suite, or going back all the way to someone who is like a teacher, or who, I've had everyone across the board. And I think that I did that on purpose, because not everyone's the same, but it's interesting to get the different perspective from people, no matter that where they might be. And so and I'm going to continue to do it because I feel it's very important. And I love integrating what I've learned here, even into my coaching practice. So I agree with you. Like you said, like having a journal, writing things out, getting it out. Yeah, you're right. Get it out of here. Get it out of get it out, to put it out there, because it's a lot better for you mentally, like you're with your mental health. If you can actually write it down, get it out, it's going to make you probably potentially feel a little bit better too.
Yeah.
Just instead of stewing it over. Like,
Yeah.
it's just the more you stew, the worse it's actually going to be for you, probably in the
Yeah.
long run, because you're in turn you're probably going to snap at someone when it wasn't needed to even happen that way. So
Yeah, it lives in your nervous system. until
Yeah.
you resolve it and dissolve it. It has to be resolved and dissolved. And so, like, when I went through my education journey, and I don't think I'm going to take another education journey in this lifetime, but my final one was a doozy. And so I ended up the inclusive language research that I created and did it took me, I think, 3 months, and I was in conversation, feeling safe enough to have an open conversation with someone. And I realized, like, I researched probably the most traumatic thing I had ever been through. And that was people's weaponizing language towards the community. And because
Hmm.
what usually happens is language is a precursor to violence. And so, like, being able to say, to research something that had a deeply profound impact on who I was as a person, my experiences, I was like doing self-care while I was doing research while finishing up school. And so it's doing something that really helps you get it out of your internal works and to be able to address it and to resolve it. That could just be having a conversation with the wall. Talk to the wall. They're not going to talk back. So then you at least vocalizing it and giving it breath and communication to it. So it's so critical.
For sure. All right. So you and I had this conversation in our pre-conversation talking about difficult managers and how much damage they can do across entire teams. From your perspective, because I know many people out there have had this, have been in these situations and have seen this. From your perspective, why do you think organizations still promote or protect leaders who are technically strong, but they're terrible with people?
And this is where, like, there's tension between values and metrics, values and performance, the incongruency between what we say and what we do, which is integrity at its finest. We want those to match up and be congruent or parallel. So I think that it calls into question what the organization values and needs at the time. So I think there's also avoidance and fear of, okay, if we address this one person, we're probably going to need to address many other people. So there is a lot to detach from. And I think being able to address that's a systemic issue usually. So again, looking at the whole system, what has been done before, what we assess off of promotions, and do we stick to that or do we excuse bad behavior for good results? So that is where we need to look at in terms of saying, okay, how do we address the maybe toxic leader or the leader that performs really well, but does it in a way that is burning the team out and creating turnover, disengagement, and all the other things that are costly indirect impacts. So I would say, in order to address that or to go into that avenue of work, is we need to really be able to start having honest conversations about what's acceptable and what's not, and look at the bottom line. Look at the budget. The budget will tell you a lot.
Mm.
So if we're
Yeah.
budgeting off of strictly performance, but we're not spending or putting into practice financial ways to support employees that are able to be safe and respond and address receiving these behaviors, then where does that fall in the company's culture and value systems? So really being able to dive into that. It's also can't get rid of it, or can't term or let go or get rid of all of these things. We have no company without
Yeah.
the people. So how do you kind of say we're going to course correct and do it effectively? And maybe that's third party coaching. It does sometimes take an external person to come in and help, because they're not attached to writing the performance review. They're not attached to, like, the decision making within the organization, and allowing the employees to share information in that way that's safe. So this way they're not talking to internal HR. They're not talking to their boss's boss. So being able to utilize external services for that when you get in that crux of this is really damaging, we've got to do something. But they're not speaking up. We've asked them 17 times, where do we go from here? We've issued a survey, like, okay, let's get someone from the outside to come in and help. And that usually might come with, we need to look at our qualifications and expectations around promotions. We need to look at how do we build collaboration and team dynamics into our evaluations versus only working independently, because now we're driving interdependence, because work is a social setting. We have to work together. And the more we progress as humans, the more social our workplaces become. We're much more interdependent. No one can do their job by themselves. I use the analogy, we're like in group projects all the time now from school, and no one really liked group projects. I don't remember meeting anyone that liked a group project. So,
No, no.
but now it's like group projects all the time. So building that into the culture to offset the behavior that was learned acceptable, and not all that leader is not fully responsible if it was enabled by the next person, or they were promoted or never had an honest conversation. So there's a big bucket to this, one
Yeah,
step at
for
a
sure.
time.
Yeah.
So those are some of the techniques I would use.
Nice. I like that. I could so go into more, but I'm going to keep my mouth shut.
Yeah, like toxic
I've
leadership
definitely
at like,
I've definitely had some. I mean, I will say this. At the last company I worked for, I was fortunate enough to take a leadership versus managing course. It was very interesting. I will say that one of the biggest things I took away from it was pretty much every single person who ever been my boss was definitely not a leader, and they were definitely a manager, and sometimes even worse, a micromanager. And it was very eye-opening to see. Now I'm going to admit, even looking through all of my history of all my bosses I've ever had, I can honestly say there probably was only one that was good. Was she a great leader? Not necessarily, but she was a great manager, and she managed us as a great team together. Had I worked with her longer, probably I might have seen some of those leadership, qualities come out. But it really did. It took me kind of to take a step back and go, huh, all right. This is how this, and I love the different types of leaders and the different type that we learned about. In a lot of ways, it really made me want to be a leader, because you saw the ones that are bad, or the ones that are not, maybe not bad. They're just, some of them sometimes are not just taught the best, or their examples of leaders weren't the best examples. So that's what, and they thought, oh, well, that was a great mentor of mine, and they seemed to lead great, or then all they did was create that fear. And that's why they were, or they became too familial and they tried to create it as a family, or and don't get me wrong, one of the best people I worked with was, we jokingly were like a big old dysfunctional family, and we had a great time. One of the things I loved the most about that leader was we worked hard. He told us from day one what was expected of us, but we also had fun, and we got together outside of work, and we had great team building, and we did things that, until this last company I'd worked with a couple of years ago, had never done team building. There was no team building. And I think, in a way, especially when you have a pretty strong core team building is what's going to help everyone kind of come together. Yes, you're going to probably learn people's unique intricacies that you may or may not like in someone on your team. And that's fine. Guess what? I've definitely worked over the years with people that I did not like, but I knew how to work with them. And I think that's what some of those team building exercises helped, because even if I didn't like that person, I knew how I could work with them, or we saw things in a different light. I thought this way and they thought, and it's like, but we still can get together and come to an answer on a point and like something we were trying to figure out.
Yeah.
It's that collaboration. It's that coming together. That who would have thought, years ago, that I was like, oh yeah, that's collaboration. All right. Because it seems to be such kind of a buzzword now.
Yeah.
In teams, like, oh, collaborate, and don't get me wrong. I mean, that was what this one company said. We're all about, collaboration. And I think it's actually even more important now, because of the diversity, the inclusivity, the amount of people that you're having in a workplace that might be more comfortable potentially in their skin. I feel it's even more important to have those collaborations, because that person, like you and we were talking earlier, like that one person who may never have spoken up before is now going to speak up. I mean, one of the best collaboration things I did was preparing one of the 2 years I was there. Like, we prepared for the Pride Festival and what we were going to be doing during the Pride Parade. And it was fun to come collaborate together from all of us from different departments in our office that we didn't work side by side every day. We didn't know what they were in and out doing, but we were able to come together to create something to showcase our company and show that, hey, we really do care about everyone. And and I thought that was, and we listened to every single person's voice. And I thought that was really cool. It made you proud of where we worked, and not a lot of employees sometimes feel that way.
Yeah. I love hearing that because that's such a great success story and a positive way to exemplify the needs of people going forward and to replicate that versus replicating what worked in the past or maybe what was success look like for that toxic leadership, that those bad behaviors or that impact people. And those team building workshops, they get a bad rep sometimes, but when they're done well,
yeah, when they're
it's
done
really
well, they're
helpful.
great. But when you have
Yeah.
ones, you're like going, okay, here we go. Here's this
Yeah.
wonderful team building thing. And
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a lot more creativity now in some of the team buildings. Like we did a cooking class. We made food together as a team builder and it was a blast. And let's be real, we weren't going to like confiscate. We weren't going to do anything bad because in the end we had to eat this food. So we weren't going to do anything horrible, but we were having fun, joking around, getting to learn employees, like all around through our department that some of them I didn't know that well because I didn't work with them on a daily basis. I might have worked with them like every month, but so it was fun.
That's a great way to like learning styles, like, and dealing with like uncertainty or ambiguity because maybe you never made the recipe, you never worked with this person before, you don't know how to communicate. Throw everyone in the kitchen. The kitchen, you'll see so much.
Oh my gosh, yes, you will. Well, and
Religion
we
and
took it a
cultural
whole nother
differences.
level because then we added alcohol to it.
Yeah.
So we had the alcohol plus the making the food.
You'll learn who the bartender is of the group.
Let's just say we were all over 21. So
Yeah,
it
good.
was like, we were protected. If we needed to, the good thing is we were literally walking from our hotel to that spot back to our hotel.
Wow.
So it's not like nobody was breaking the law by walking intoxicated down the street back to the hotel. So.
That's boundaries are always important to set those clear boundaries. So we
And
do. Yeah.
you probably need to learn. I mean, I guarantee you some people we definitely learned how much to potentially drink or not because at the end of the day, we were in a work team builder type of activity. Not that anybody did anything obnoxious, but I'm just saying you still have to think about that in the back of your head because it is
You're
still
part of the
work.
company. You're in a work role. You're wearing that work role where that's part of who we are. We carry the title, the identity piece with us. And so we have to be mindful of that while we engage in social time. That helps. But
Very much so.
you learn like the strengths of your teams, who you can call when like there's things that I don't like doing that I'm not strong in. And having those kind of moments, I'm like, great, I can call this person. They're not going to judge me for like reaching out for help and saying, look, I suck at this. I know you're amazing at it. Help me out and help us achieve the goal. So yeah, it's such a good place to be in.
All right. I'm contemplating two different questions, so I'm trying to think which one I want to ask. Okay. That's still fitting because we're still in the thick of everything, thanks to the current administration. So obviously there's a bigger cultural layer happening right now with the political shifts, the changing DEI language, and organizations trying to reposition themselves. What are you noticing about how companies are signaling their values right now?
Decision making is the root of it or part of that crux. It's like, okay, we have a company to make sure we can move forward. And so executive orders can cause punitive like results or we could lose funding and other things. So it's really this boat of how do we make this work for our people, but also like not damage our organization where we need to let go of people but we also have our culture and values to uphold. So it's a really tight dance that people are doing. And I think this is where intention and impact collide. It's our intention is to do the right thing. The impact might be felt as unfair in question because when we're inclusive, when we're equitable, that is action. We have to act to achieve those. Diversity, we can have them diversity represented just by being in a space together. But the other elements have to do with action taking. And so I often recommend being transparent to the extent you can be, and also considering fairness. And so if you have to make a tough decision because you're questioning if it's going to affect your organizational financial health, then we want to at least give people the why, and also enable our stakeholders to ask questions and be honest with the answers. We don't need a political talking point. That's to maintain control. But in
Hmm.
order to really hear each other, we need to have discussion and discussion prompts. And so I think from what I've been reading, there's language changing, there's words changing. As we talk about inclusive language and words and all the other things, it's the depth of it is, how do we explain ourselves, and doing it in a way where people can ask the follow-up questions, be part of that decision making process of what to do going forward. Pulling people in has so much good power in there, because they might offer ideas and they're part of the solution. So now they're saying, yes, we did this and this is why. And they're the advocates for it. And they're telling so doing it in a collaborative, co-efficient way, doing it with transparency and fairness in mind, as well as being able to acknowledge that we have a responsibility to move the organization forward. And so that's where I see a lot of organizations going and trying to navigate those waves, because at the end of the day, it's a tough boat to be in. And I have empathy for having to be in that boat for folks. And so, but your decision making is going to be questioned. So whether you provide space for it or not, other people might
Hmm.
create gossip. They might say things online. There's assumptions being made. So get out in front of it, explain yourselves, share the reasoning, create the forums for people to ask questions or express concerns, and build and pull people in those changes. That's a change initiative. And that's also identity at its best. That's the organizational identity. So who the organization is, that identity, and that's human identity, the stakeholders, all kind of colliding. And so where I look at Target and a few other places, they were making fast decisions, or it seemed, and people had an adverse reaction. And so people are detaching themselves. So they're no longer shopping there. They're quitting their jobs, whatever it is. That's a form of detachment. And they don't want to be associated for the reasons, because it doesn't agree with my value systems or what I believe in. And
Hmm.
so tweaking that into pulling people in and being transparent and making decisions around that, that will help. And so it's going to be an interesting couple of years. I was literally writing my research as executive orders were coming out, and companies were like making decisions here and there and everywhere. And my committee was like, you have enough. You have to keep writing. But what about the news tomorrow?
Yeah, it's a very interesting world we're living in right now, because yeah, it's tricky. And I feel very fortunate, because that last company I worked for was private. And so they never I haven't gone on to see their website, but I would bet they haven't changed anything, because they don't have to technically, and they didn't have to. They're also not the company's not even based in the United States. They're actually based out of the UK. So,
Yeah.
but that being said, I think that is what's going to make it potentially challenging, though, for employees, potential employees looking at companies. Because if you don't see that representation
Mhm.
on your websites, or as we know, or they only see the rainbow washing come June during
Mhm.
Pride Month,
Yeah.
that is probably going to potentially not have that employee apply to work for them. Even if they do have a great, diversity, inclusion, and equity, even if they have something in place. But as I do know, words have been changed. There, from what I understand, I'm talking with many people, DEI is still there. It's just worded differently now,
Yeah. Yeah.
just to appease the government, so they
Mhm.
still get the funding, they get what they need. And I get it, I understand it. I also understand that the government's not very bright, because what DEI really is about isn't just about the LGBTQ plus community. It's
Mhm.
about people who are disabled. It's about people of color. It's about, my sister was in this position. She was coming back from having childbirth. Like, those
Mhm.
people are all under that whole DEI window. And it's just fascinating how uneducated people are to not really know what it really means to what was being put out there.
Yeah,
So,
it's had a couple conversations where DEI is everybody. Everybody is in the DEI, like, affected by it because it's diversity, it's like equity, inclusion, belonging. Like, these are things that affect everybody. When we get to where different social identities are impacted for it differently, then people have sometimes reactions of, I call it like, what about me syndrome? Like, what about me? What about me? And
yeah,
so then it's like, okay, but like, we have to acknowledge that this group of people, generally speaking, have not been able to get resources to for X, Y, or Z reasons. So, and I think that's where I think sometimes companies might get it wrong in terms of their the way that they go through DEI initiatives or culture shifts and things like that. You have to have a psychology piece to it.
hmm,
Education is important because we don't learn about these things in our school systems often. I mean, I didn't, and for me, I look at it as the world sees me as a white male before they sees me as part of the LGBT community. So I'm already
yeah,
acknowledging that, and I have to make sure I'm highly aware of that and be able to help pull other people in by explaining and teaching back because I had to do the work. And so the
right.
ones that are doing the work, whether it's self responsibility, curiosity, whatever it is, it's uncomfortable because you're unlearning things that were given to you or taught to you from people you trusted, loved, mentored, supposed to. So it's a rewiring and a relearning. We don't learn about it in school. We
No,
we don't. So
no.
we're not taught to work with differences in a way. We don't interview for it. We don't often say, what are your learning styles in an interview and what kind of ticks you off and how much do you know about different kinds of people? What are your biases? How do you recover when you mispronounce someone's name or misgender someone? Those are the things we have to ask in interviews to be able, and that's integrating DEI into hiring practices. So
And
yeah,
it's funny you say that because, and let's be real, a lot of that is not appropriate to ask in a question like when you're interviewing someone. But
yeah.
in the reality of it, those are questions that kind of need to be asked
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
it's going to help if you have someone that happens to be very, just for instance, very anti-LGBT, and then all of a sudden you bring them onto a team that, let's say there's 5 members on that team and 3 out of the 5 are part of the LGBTQ plus community, you have a serious problem now.
Yeah.
Because they're now going to probably be, if they don't get written up probably really quickly, there's going to be some serious issues like
There's
from
going to be
this day
conflict.
one,
There will be conflict.
huge conflict from
Yeah.
day one.
Yeah.
And so uh, I will admit, you know, as an openly gay male, I would say I've been pretty fortunate overall that I've never been attacked based on my sexuality. I might have been attacked ironically, because I was a male and not a female in a role. But outside of that, it can definitely be a challenge. And I know I kind of feel sometimes we need to be asking those harder questions because you're going to really find out who that person is and do you want that person really representing your company
Mhm.
in the long
Yeah.
term.
And this is for me and how I navigate the heart of human beings at work and just being global citizens is that we are designed to be imperfect in this way. We're all biased. It's the way our brains work. We have favorability towards certain groups. It's learned
Mm-hmm.
behavior. It's what we've been exposed to and not exposed to and things like that. So the more comfortable we become acknowledging that, it gives us the ability to recognize it, separate it, and say, okay, how can I do better? But we also have different levels of responsibility. Like for me, if I'm with someone that's maybe of color and LGBT, they're in that intersectionality piece. They might have the capacity piece. They might have said, "I've had enough of this. I just dealt with it for a while." Like, so there's a capacity piece, and so everyone reaches a point where you say, "Okay, I've had enough. It's not my job to teach someone else." So it's lots of layers and being able to say, like, how do I help, but also not affect my well-being along the way because the whole week was threaded with microaggressions for someone and
Yeah.
they just need a break. And so I'll like, that's where I'm like, I'll help. Like, let me share with you some learnings. But I'm very open about my story. I grew up and learned probably not the best ways of interacting with difference. And so I had to unlearn what was wired to me And that's why I got an inclusive leadership concentration, because my thing is I've got to lead people. So I need to understand people, which means I got to understand DEI, which means identity and how that impacts performance. All of that kind of lays together. So we're really shooting ourselves in the foot. So we need to be able to have these conversations. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
biased when it comes to food service workers. I spent 16 years. My food service people, I'll always defend
Oh,
you.
yeah. I mean, and that makes sense
Yeah,
completely.
yeah,
So, all right. Well, so we've been deep, we've been
yeah.
real, but now we're going to get mildly unhinged in the best way. This is my favorite part of my interviews. It's rapid fire questions.
Let's do it.
So, quick answers only. One of the fun things that I've done this season and even last season is getting a little bit more personally focused on who my guests are. So, for instance, based on where they might be located or where they grew up or what, so I like to have fun just because people are literally listening to this all over the world and they might go, oh, I might want to go and visit here, or I might want to go, check this out because that actually sounded really cool. So, all right. You've got one perfect Baltimore day off. Are you starting in Fells Point, hanging near the Inner Harbor, or going full neighborhood vibes somewhere else entirely?
I am doing neighborhood vibes entirely. I'm in Mount Vernon. It's a great mix between like community and city. There's like wine and different restaurants and bars that are
Ooh,
just very, very relaxed, very community oriented, and quieter but still fun.
awesome.
And I can walk everywhere, which is great.
I love that. All right. So be honest. If someone says Baltimore, what are you defending first? Crab cakes, pit beef, burger cookies, or pure Old Bay chaos?
Oh my gosh. None of the above. And I'll say why.
Okay.
We're going really unhinged. I am not from here. I have lived here on and off for a while. So I have learned to appreciate the culture of crabs and Old Bay. But I'm born in New York and lived all over the East Coast. And it is in my DNA to defend New York bagels and pizza and pastries. And
Ooh,
so that's where
I
my
love
heart
that.
is for food. But yeah, but I will defend my friends from Baltimore an advocate for their love of crabs and Old Bay.
Okay. So New York, what's your favorite topping on a pizza?
Ooh. I love just straight up cheese, sometimes with mushrooms. So classic, simple, it's there.
All right. I like that. Bagel. Do you have a specific place you enjoyed going to growing up? Or do you
Yeah, I don't have a specific place because I've lived there for first part of I'm like a gypsy. I've moved all over the East Coast, but I would be at my grandparents' house on Long Island, and when I
nice.
woke up, there were bagels on the table. So wherever they went,
Ooh.
I don't know
Do you
where
have a
it was.
favorite do you have a favorite topping to go on those bagels?
I either butter or cream cheese, and it is usually like toasted sesame or everything. Those are my two favorites. So, and I will eat them
Love it.
every hour of every day.
I am a bagel and cream cheese, and actually I just finished up my package that I had of everything, bagels. And I'm like, okay, what am I going to do next? I need them now.
Yeah.
Because I'm a true bagels and cream cheese. I do like butter. Sometimes I'll just do butter, but just the cream cheese just gives it just a little bit more. All
Nice.
right. So before we close, Greg, what's one actionable step our listeners can take today to better navigate work with more awareness, authenticity, and intention?
Actionable step. Notice your body, how it's reacting. If your heart rate is going, if you are sweating, if you are talking really fast, which is not normal, which is not part of your norm behavior, ask why. Your body will tell you. That's your unconscious nervous system acting up and telling you something. It's speaking to you. So ask why. So that's your starting point.
I like that. It's very smart. It's interesting because you brought up a very important thing to check on, like what your body is saying. And last episode that just was out, we talked about burnout, and you have to see what your body is telling you, because most most people know they're in burnout, but they don't want to admit it. And so I think this is a great way to kind of reiterate that what is your body telling you? Like through our conversation today, it's just like, okay, if something's not feeling right, or you're, like you said, if you're all of a sudden talking faster, you're talking, you can feel yourself getting angry when you're talking. I mean, first off, take a step back, take a deep breath. You might very much regret on what you might say next. So you should always, take a deep breath and go, like, how many times, I know even my partner does this to this day, like, might start out an email and boy does it, or a text, and boy does it change before it's actually officially really sent.
Yeah.
Because you need to take a step back and go, okay, let me get out of that space for a second. Let me take a step back and then go, and move forward with what you do, and do it in the right way, do it in the professional way. That, you don't want to, I can say this as a coach, our job market sucks right now. So you don't want to be one of those people having to look for a job, because if you've been at a job currently for a certain amount of years, I hate to tell you, times have changed. It's a little bit harder to get a job right now. Probably the way you got that job is probably not the same way you have to do it now.
Yeah. Times have changed,
Times have definitely changed.
You mentioned like that, just to kind of round that out really quick, if that's okay.
Of course.
When we're feeling that anger or frustration or threat mode, and we're responding that way, our brain cannot decipher the difference between a physical threat and emotional threat. Like, it just is a threat. So, like, and that's where the body starts reacting. So, like, that angry email you're sending or the tone starts to change, your brain is like, you're in the presence of a grizzly bear, but really someone's just getting on your last nerve, maybe.
Yeah.
So they're really recognizing that. And yeah, the cheers to anyone searching for jobs. My heart is with you. It's tough, and I hope
Yeah.
we're having positive reframes about it. But yeah, that's rough, and my heart goes out to folks.
Yeah, for sure. Well, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. Greg, this was such a rich conversation. I appreciate how grounded, how thoughtful, how real that you were talking about leadership, identity, performance, and what it means to build workplaces that don't just demand results, but actually support the humans creating them. So thank you.
My pleasure. It's been a pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
And to everyone listening, I hope this episode reminded you that high performance should not require self-abandonment. You do not have to trade your well-being, your truth, or your identity just to be seen as valuable. And if this conversation hit home for you, of course, share this episode with a friend, a coworker, or even a leader who needs to hear it. And of course, I have to say this because this is my podcast. Be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and send me a message with your biggest takeaway. And if you're in a season of trying to rebuild your confidence, rediscover your purpose, or figuring out what kind of work actually fits who you are, you can actually connect with me through the link in the show notes. Until next time, keep showing up, keep protecting your peace, and keep building a life and career that let you be empowered and out.